I'm just going up this water spout, y'all. Y'all, hope it don't rain.
The itsy bitsy spider climbed up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. Out came the sun and dried up all the rain. So the itsy bitsy spider climbed up the spout again.
I'm just going up this water spout, y'all. Hope it don't rain. I'm an itsy bitsy spider. I'm also a good hider. Y'all ain't gonna find me.
The itsy bitsy spider climbed up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. Out came the sun and dried up all the rain. So the itsy bitsy spider climbed up the spout again.
Going up this,
Up the spout again.
going up this.
Up the spout again.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'm here again. It's 9 o'clock. We're doing live streams to promote Where's Itsy Bitsy Spider. I'm here again with my co-host, Chris Porro. Here he is. I'm going to switch this around, who's there. And we got our special guest today is Dr. Tim DuRan. Tim, hello.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So the reason I've invited Tim on the show this morning is because, well, his daughter read the book that Chris and I wrote called Pocket Full of Frosting. Well, Chris wrote it and I did the illustrations. We mentioned it before. So I don't know, he popped in my head. But then also recently I was talking about Egypt and the fact that I had once climbed up the smaller of the three Great Pyramids of Giza. And then you, Tim, had posted some nice pictures of his recent visit to Egypt of you dressed up and, visiting the sites there. So Tim, thanks. Welcome on board. Another thing you posted recently, so you get a bit more about your background. So you're a professor at
California State University, Los Angeles.
Yes, right. So I wanted to say that right. Yes. So where you lecture in history?
Yeah, I do ancient history for the most part. Yeah.
Ancient history. So, we've talked about some other things like the Proto Indo-Europeans, which is something that I first learned about from Tim. I was not really aware of them. This was many years ago. But so Tim, you recently posted a video of yourself as a young punk in Southern California. Yes. So maybe I thought we'd start with the punk music scene in the the 1980s.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk. Do you have specific questions, or do you want me to just start talking?
No, not really. I don't know. It's just a chat. Yeah, we'll think of questions. Chris usually has a lot of interesting questions.
Yeah, they randomly popped in my head.
But you posted a video of yourself that I saw, so I was sort of aware that you'd been a punk, and yes, and you quite enjoy sort of like Art Deco and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And those vents. And you told me once, I think that, or somebody told me that that sort of kind of was a progression from punk. That a lot of punks sort of then went into sort of dressing in fancy clothes and
right. Well, okay, yeah, I'll talk about that. So I was very much of a punk. I was not one of the original punks in 1976 in London or New York City, but I was very, very fond of punk in the 80s. I think my first show that I went to was around 85 or 6. It was Social Distortion, a very beloved Southern California band. And I think Mike Ness was doing an anti-drug benefit or something like that. And they did, it was at an outdoor high school amphitheater, and it was amazing. And they closed with a cover of Bad Moon Rising in a punky style, and it was just amazing. And I also saw Motorhead very early on, around 86, something like that. And they were a metal band, but they were very beloved by most of the punks. I was very, very, very fond of going to punk shows, and this was before I could drive, so I was taking buses everywhere, all over Los Angeles. And I think there's a lot of good reasons why I liked punk a lot. And after a while, all of my friends started to go to prison for stuff. One of them was for stabbing someone. Another one was for throwing Molotov cocktails at his ex-girlfriend's car. And I realized that I wanted to get out of Los Angeles and that kind of bad environment. And I had a girlfriend in Palo Alto. She said, let's move to Palo Alto. And I said, okay, I want to get out of here because I'm afraid I'm going to be next. And then I slowly started to get more interested in the world of vintage. And I remember going to Club Deluxe, which was the absolute epicenter of the entire neo-swing vintage scene, bar none, in the early 90s.
Club Deluxe on Haight?
On Upper Haight, it was. So around, yeah, it's a wonderful place. It has kind of a portal door.
Yeah, they still have that last time I was there.
Yeah, it was, and this was around 91, 91, I guess, that I had a punk friend down near Palo Alto, and he said, hey, let's go to this place where everyone dresses like a film noir. And I thought, that is funny and amazing and wonderful. And I went, and I was still very punked out. But I remember seeing a guy at the bar who had a pompadour and an early 1960s kind of skinny suit, and he had skinhead tattooed on his knuckles from obviously years before. And I was thinking, okay, this guy has found something, another subculture that is probably better and more positive than the one that he's from. And I thought that was really cool. And so I started to go there. And I started to get really into jazz. I'd always loved early Duke Ellington. I'm not a late jazz guy. I'm not a 1960s jazz guy. I'm a 1920s jazz guy. And I'd always loved the very early Duke Ellington. And I started to go there and make friends that were in that kind of neo swing scene. I was never much of a dancer, but there was also, it wasn't just the dancing, it was the collecting of antiques and artifacts and the dressing and the love of the music and the old movies. And I'd always been a big fan of film noir. So what I discovered in San Francisco is that there was a huge subculture of, this is just known as the vintage subculture, and a ton of the people, like you say, were punks at one point, and they still love punk, but they just sort of got interested in other stuff as well as punk. And so now I live in Los Angeles because that's where my job is. Otherwise, I'd be in the Bay Area, which I vastly prefer. And I know every single vintage person down here, and there's probably 1,000 people down here that are members of this subculture.
Yes, that's good. So, so I mean, what I find interesting is I just love the diversity. I like people wearing different clothes and dressing up differently. I mean, this is always a big feature. I'm going to bring everything back to my books. It's a big feature in the books. I have that, and you can find punks in history throughout. Where's Itsy Bitsy Spider? And yes, and we don't want people throwing Molotov cocktails or children growing up to throw Molotov cocktails and go to jail. And one way to help prevent that is to give them some different perspective in books and show them some diversity and show some different things. I mean, I don't know what leads to that. I mean, we've talked about sort of people who are sort of, a small percentage of people who are sort of born with antisocial behaviors, let's say. Yeah. But there are other people sort of get driven to it from one way or another, usually because of feeling very limited.
Yeah.
In their options. And, one way to sort of avoid a lot of the strife, I'm always trying to show a positive view of the world and like how we can all get along. And one way to avoid that is to sort of have a good understanding of history. So maybe we could start with a little bit, because yesterday we were talking about having my friend Jerry on and another friend Andrew, he's written a book called Fake History, and we sort of touched a little bit on Ireland. We didn't want to get too much into that, but Jerry's family came from Ireland and lived in Chicago. Like when she grew up, that's where she grew up. And but there's somebody, I read an article online that sort of said, basically how the Irish people were descended from the Proto Indo-Europeans, and the Proto Indo-Europeans emerged from Ukraine area. So Ukraine is another thing that I'm, obviously we're all interested in Ukraine right now. I mean, my personal connection is that that's the latest place that my books were published was in the Ukraine. So probably part of the Western effort, effort to Westernize people. But, they're not available in Russia, but they are available in Ukraine and Poland, which is interesting. Although I did notice that in Poland, they had changed the dark-skinned princess on the P to a light-skinned princess on the P. But, again, I try and show a lot of diversity in that. I don't know. Anyway, so maybe you could tell us a little bit about the Proto-Indo-Europeans.
Sure. Yeah. So 1798, the British governor of India was studying the ancient Indian language, Sanskrit, and he was studying its grammar forms, and he realized that it had similarities in terms of grammar, like the endings of verbs and nouns, and also in terms of vocabulary to languages that he had studied. So Latin and Greek, obviously English, German, the Romance languages. And so he thought Sanskrit must come from the same root as Latin, Greek, and the Germanic languages, etc.
Wow, yeah, I love that fact. Yes, so studying of the languages. So there we go, literacy and language. Bring it back to that. Yes, great.
Right. Right, and so slowly the picture became clear over the 19th century, and the realization was made that these languages, the majority of languages in Europe, with the exception of Basque, which is spoken in the Pyrenees between Spain and France, and also the exception of Hungarian, Finnish, and Estonian. The rest of all of the European native languages all are in the Indo-European family. So through archaeology, this was traced back and linked to an archaeological horizon called the Kurgan culture, Kurgan, and this is in southern Russia and Ukraine. The key book to read is by David W. Anthony. It's called The Horse, the Wheel, and Language. Big book, very interesting. I've taught the whole thing. And it turns out that this group that spoke a language that we call Proto Indo-European were the first people to domesticate horses as well.
Oh, they were the first? Yes, okay.
Yeah, there's very, very clear archaeological evidence for bridles and stirrups in that archaeological culture. And so apparently this group who spoke that language, they sort of diffused out from that center in southern Russia and Ukraine. Some ended up going into Iran, some to India, some to Armenia, and then a lot went west into Europe.
Okay.
And, yeah.
So they sort of seeded everybody else. Yes. All right. So that's like the book 2 of Clan of the Cave Bear.
Yeah, I remember Clan of the Cave Bear very well, and I remember not extremely well, but I remember it sort of well. But that's about Neanderthals versus Homo sapiens.
That's the first book, which is pretty good. The second book, which is less good, and is about she meets the sort of people with the horses. So
Valley of the Horses.
Valley of the Horses. Yes.
Jean M. Owl or something like that. Yeah.
Jean M. Owl. Yes. I don't know. I didn't. I read that one. I didn't really read anymore, but I did love Clan of the Cave Bear. Yes.
Yeah. When this was discovered, this link between Sanskrit, is that what you said?
Yeah.
And Latin, European languages?
Yeah.
Was this like a breakthrough discovery at some point in time, or is this recent?
So that's 1798 when this was figured out.
Okay.
So so over all of the 1800s, more and more of the pieces got put together, and then they realized that the Celtic languages, which really look very different, are actually also in that same, what we call the Indo-European family. So Gaelic, Manx, etc. Those are actually in the same big family. They just don't look very much like they are, but they actually are. So what we're talking about here is not necessarily populations moving out, although there's certainly a lot of that, but also there were other people all over Europe. And so the people who spoke the Proto-Indo-European languages, for whatever reason, those languages became popular. Maybe they were status languages or something. So there were people who weren't, racially, Ukrainian, who were speaking these languages. Okay, and unfortunately, in the 19th century, that linguistic group got sort of misapprehended as a racial group. Okay, and this is where things get very unfortunate and unhappy, because some thinkers in the late 19th century, mostly German thinkers and some British ones, started to think that it's the Proto-Indo-Europeans that had some sort of racial superiority, or some nonsense like that. Okay, and so obviously that sort of theory went out of fashion around 1945, as you might guess.
Yes, all right, yes. Yeah, well, we mentioned that, yeah. Well, whatever else we do, we certainly knew what the Nazis did was wrong.
Absolutely.
Yes, they made it very clear what not to do. Yes, all right. So that's very interesting. Now, what else should we talk about?
Yeah, I didn't know any of that, by the way. That was all the first time I heard Proto-Europeans was yesterday from Chuck, which I still didn't understand, but now I'm an expert compared to 2 days ago now.
You can, I actually really like Wikipedia. People make fun of it a lot, but just look up Proto-Indo-Europeans on Wikipedia, and very often their articles there are quite good.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I used to go to Wikipedia like all the time, but in the last couple of years, I found stuff where I'm like, I don't know Wikipedia. I don't know if I'm buying this.
Chris has become very suspicious of all media and what they're all trying to tell us. Which I suppose is sort of somewhat true. I mean, you're always only ever getting a sort of unclear picture from anything.
I mean, unfortunately, I'm at this place now where I think a lot needs to be vetted. Not that everything's a lie, but I just feel like there's popular narratives, and sometimes they're close to the truth, and sometimes they're Orwellian, like 180 out of sync with the truth. So I'm pretty careful about stuff. A lot more careful now than I was when I was like in my 20s. And Wikipedia I used to go to all the time until I found some stuff where I'm like, whoa, this is incomplete. It's misleading.
Right.
But only on certain topics. So,
well, I'll tell you, if I may, one of the things that I try to inculcate in my students is the importance of getting to know people who are experts on subjects and who have studied subjects for decades and who have been trained by people who have studied subjects for decades, because those are the kinds of people who probably do have a good grasp on whatever is interesting to you. And sometimes I fear that there are a lot of people, especially in the USA, but in a lot of other places too, who maybe they've never met someone who had dedicated their life or decades on a particular subject and who had been trained by other people who had been doing this, who had in turn been trained. So they end up sort of feeling like all knowledge is dubious, and all knowledge isn't dubious. It depends on it. What you want to do is find people who are experts, who have been trained by experts on something like Proto Indo-European, for example.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Also experts. Okay. Yes. Because prosperity. I don't know who said this, Adam Smith or someone. Prosperity, or specialization is the sort of key to prosperity. You know, so we all have to become like more expert in our own little area, but it means it's impossible for us to know everything. Like in the Renaissance man could know everything. You know, now we really can't. It's just impossible. And you know, if you're going to be the man, like in my book, I have the story of the little red hen. The little red hen does it all themselves. I always sort of like that story, and I'm kind of a guy with my books. I like to sort of do them all myself. But there is a bit, you're sort of a little bit willfully blind to other people telling you, or maybe there's a better way to do it, or something like that. And there's only so much you can do if you're doing it yourself. I couldn't, I could make a picture book. I couldn't make an iPhone.
Well, it's like that book that me and Chuck did. I wrote it down. And I was like, I'll never finish this because I can't illustrate. There's just no way the thing was going to get finished.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mean Pocket Full of Frosting, right?
Yeah. Well, so I don't know if Chuck ever told you the origin story on that. Well, the story, I don't know if it's an origin story, but I was watching my daughter one night having glasses of wine, and I just scribbled it down. And the next day I was like, well, once I'm like completely sober and I look at this a second time, if I think it's good, maybe I'll try to do a book. And I was like, there's no way I can do a book unless somebody will illustrate it, because that's where all the work is. And I was like, I'm not taking 6 months off to learn how to draw this thing. And I called Chuck up, and he was in the right place. I mean, you were.
I'd been to a workshop on doing children's books, so I was like, okay, yes, I'll have a go at a children's book, and I did the children's book very quickly. Yeah. It was all pretty clear and gave reference. So we got some comments of people watching. We've got John and Tina's here, and Dale. Dale's great. Dale's going to be helping me co-host tomorrow. But he says all his knowledge of Sanskrit comes from season 1, Space 99 episode, Testament of Arcadia. And he also makes more serious comment. It's not just knowing expert. It's not just not knowing experts. There are people who deliberately show distrust of expert for their own reasons. Yes. Well, that's another big thing I've been saying. So yes, what can we do to sort of combat misinformation, other than keeping our eyes open and trying to get perspective, I suppose?
Wait, can I take it? I can tell you what I did.
I was just gonna say, I totally agree with what you're saying, Tim. Like, find people that are experts, and I kind of try to employ the scientific method, which is to listen to all the qualified experts. And sometimes there'll be a lot of agreement, and sometimes there won't be. And then look at their support for it. But do listen to all the what I'd call qualified voices, which doesn't mean you just take a poll of Twitter. There's a lot of people with strong opinions on Twitter and Facebook, but people that have actually been in these areas for a long time. And then the other thing, unfortunately, I think you have to do is you have to follow the money. I mean, if people have huge conflicts of interest, you definitely have to take that into consideration. There's a reason that, follow the money. I think it's the golden rule of journalism, right? It helps explain a lot. And whenever there's billions of dollars involved in people having a certain opinion, I think you need to question that, what the real motivations are.
I agree with you, but I would like to throw in a plug actually at this point for formal education. And I know that formal education gets a bad rap, but I will say that formal education is a very, very good thing. I was in the California junior college system for a long time. I was working full time in an organic grocery store in San Francisco, going to college on the a little bit a class or two per semester for years. And then I transferred to UC Berkeley, which is one of the best universities in the country. And there I met people who had that the instructors there had actually researched things and been trained by experts. And there's really something to be said for being in that environment. And these are people who know their stuff. These are the people who you could ask a specific detailed question about something Proto Indo-European, and they would be able to say, here's the evidence, here's what this scholar thinks, here's what this scholar thinks, here are the problems with this reconstruction. And that is something that formal education at the very good universities is really good at, is having experts in subjects, and you can pursue a field of knowledge that interests you in an excellent university and eat your heart out. And that's exactly what I did with Greek and Roman history. That's where I got my PhD. And so now I know people who are actual experts and etc. What I fear is that the chain of knowledge gets broken and there's entire families who literally don't know any experts in anything. And those are the kinds of people that end up believing nonsense. For about 4 months, I was on the Flat Earth Facebook pages trying to figure out why people believe that the earth is flat. And I was debating with these people for 2 hours a day. The thing that I realized was that a lot of these people didn't have any expert in their family. They didn't know, no member of their family knew any experts well enough to be able to trust anyone who was an actual expert in anything. And so their attitude was a very kind of anything goes about knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, the earth is, if I can just talk a little bit about the earth is flat thing, I kind of did the same thing you did, Tim. I got interested in it because it just seems so bizarre. And the bizarre thing wasn't that people, got this wrong idea in their head. The bizarre thing for me is that there's like a small cottage industry around it. But there doesn't seem to be, like, usually a hoax at some point is a major payoff for someone.
Right.
Usually if you're going to put out that information. And so if I was to say, hey, the earth is flat and we've been deceived, and people put all this time and money printing the textbooks wrong, teaching this in our universities, and it's a huge, amazingly large, costly effort to teach people the wrong thing, that the earth is actually not flat. Are you following me so far? I'm just saying, what's the payoff for them? Right. Where's the money in deceiving?
I think they're more of a hobby, aren't they?
How does it work at all for them? It doesn't work at all. Why would you go through that huge effort with zero payoff on the other side?
Right.
Well, I watched there was a movie about this guy. I forgot his name, but it's terrible. But he was shooting himself up in a rocket in the desert.
Right.
Just like, he didn't believe the earth was flat. You couldn't tell him the earth was flat, and his friends were all helping him shoot himself up in a rocket, and the movie was all about him. And then, just like right around the beginning of the pandemic, he blew himself up in a rocket. And the flat earth people were all very upset. And I took him to task a bit, and I said, well, if you were better friends to him, maybe he would have gone and, taken his enthusiasm and energy and done something to help kids in schools or something like that. There are kids out there who need teachers. They need people being energetic. They don't need people blowing themselves up in the desert because they just can't think of anything better to do. And their friends are sort of all telling them it's a good idea.
I agree.
I watched a documentary on flat earthers because it was so confusing for me how this thing got started and how it kept going. And one of the things I did notice in it is these people that were at the kind of that were selling stuff at the flat earther conferences, the celebrities of that world were definitely very much enjoying their celebrity and their status. It was like they created their own
subculture,
their own, like, network.
Yeah, it's super fun. It's super fun. It's a magical, fantastical world. Where people ride dinosaurs and their Egyptian sarcophagi. I don't know, Egyptian pyramids. All that stuff is a big part of it, right? You want to, all that stuff. It's very strangely fascinating to us, and I love to draw. you know, ancient art and ancient artifacts.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a scene in Where's the Penguin where I did the museum, and you know, I just love, especially, you know, if I find some weird thing. I love the Fields Museum in Chicago and looking at all the you know, the early native artifacts there. You know, my family were getting very annoyed with me because I was still only on room 2, and they through the whole lot, but just the little art and the objects that they would make, very fascinating. And that was actually quite a big influence, I think, you know, on sort of moving my art forward once I really sort of looked at some of that stuff, I think. Yes, I mean, as it is on a lot of people. But, you know, so yes, there's a romance and a fantasy, and yes, and, you know, you get some friends, and, you know, like, but I suggest play Dungeons and Dragons. That's very good. I've been doing that. You know, I did that when I was young. I took it up again in later life, and, you know, it sort of ticks a lot of those boxes for you without having to blow yourself up.
Skip the flat earth stuff and just go to like Dungeons and Dragons. You can have your fantasies and kind of I don't know, put them in their own little fantasy box and not try to project them on the physical world, the you know, world of science.
Yes. All right. Now let's have a look at some comments here. All right. So, well, John Larry's just Dale asked a question about the current college model of in-person classes still the optimum format for instruction. Well, this is quite some talk of moving to online instruction. I don't know. So how do you feel about online instruction versus in-person these days? Here we are online.
It's a perfectly reasonable thing to ask. I was doing remote teaching for 2 years during the COVID thing, and now we're back in person. I found techniques that worked pretty well online. I'll be honest with you. But I do think that there's something very special about being in a room with people. So
yes.
Go either way. Yeah.
Yes, there's a big difference. Like the more in person, it's a bit like the sort of progression of a thought. You can have a thought in your head. It doesn't really matter. The thoughts in your head. You can have any thought in your head, you know, and you're not going to act on it. I heard a piece on the radio about a man who kept thinking if he saw a knife, he was going to have to pick it up and stab somebody. He didn't do it, but he just always thought he was going to do it. And eventually they managed to convince him, you know, that he wasn't going to do it. You know, and you're not a thought. But, you know, then you can write a thought, you know, then that makes it more sort of permanent. You can speak a thought. The next, I suppose the second thing is that the speak a thought, you know, people can hear it, you can write it. You know, but then the real thing is act it. You know, do you act on it? What's the difference between the sort of thought and action, I suppose? But yes, being in the presence of somebody, you know, we all have our own sort of ability to persuade and influence. As a lecturer, I mean, yeah, you're standing up in front of a class. You know, they're not going to, you know, not going to miss anything, I suppose, if you're there. And attention is sort of forced onto the person you're listening to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is better when you're live in person in terms of making sure that people are paying attention. They can't just like disappear into another room or something.
I do think that there's these social norms around. You know, for some reason, people do engage more when you're right there live, because the social norm is it's kind of rude to ignore a live person. It's a little easier to ignore one online,
right.
And you can't really track each other that well either. I mean, my daughter was online for a year. She's it was her 8th grade year, and there's all this concern about, you know, kids that age, the social isolation, you know, being bad for them.
Well, I think part of it, okay, it's the future. I've always loved science fiction and the future. You know, I like sort of science fiction, and I also like fantasy. I like them both, right? Okay, what does it mean? You know, that like you know, seeing history, it's a different world. It's a different perspective. People thought very differently. They didn't think like movies always tend to make people in the past think like today. I mean, that's the enjoyment of a movie. Oh, like this is how we were sort of with our sensibilities. But really back then, people thought and did things very differently and believed very different things. And in the future, they will too. You know, so really whatever we're thinking and believing right now, it's a sort of everything's just a transitionary state between one and the other. So I think, you know, you need to sort of, you know, understanding both.
When I was a kid, I always thought, you know, I don't think I was taught history that well. You know, my experience before, or even through high school, right? Even probably through college, was history was about, and my short-term memory is terrible, so this was really tedious for me. It was all about, you know, names, dates, places, and just memorize all this stuff. It seemed like this timeline.
Yes, that's the hard work part.
And then I realized later on, much too late, how important history is and how much you can actually learn from it, and how much, you know, this idea of history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And you know, humans don't change that much biologically over hundreds or thousands of years, and you see the same loops again and again and again. And now I'm fascinated by history. I wish I could go back in time and find a great history teacher to start me on that journey, you know, before I was like 20. That would have been.
Well, hopefully, Itsy Bitsy Spider will do that. But Tim, you said you could only be here for a little while. So I don't know how you're doing time.
Yeah, I do have to get to work, actually. I have to go lecture.
Yes.
Today I'll be lecturing on the Russian Revolution. I'm teaching one Modern Europe class just for kicks this semester. And I'm also going to be lecturing on the transition from hunter-gathering over to the Neolithic. So thank you so much for having me on your show. I really appreciate it. It was great fun.
Yes, well, we would love to have a longer conversation with you about hunter-gatherers. I've got a whole comic strip idea based on like primitive people and wading ape theory and all this sort of stuff that I've sort of been playing around with for a while. So yeah, maybe you'll come back again sometime. I
would be delighted to. Thank you.
Best background ever, by the way.
Oh, thank you. It's a 1927 house that I bought. That is completely intact.
Oh, that too. But I was talking about the sarcophagus. Is that?
Oh yes, that did not come with the house, alas.
Yeah. No, the house is super cool too. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, folks. So, are you going to clock me out, or how does this work?
Yes. I'll switch. I can switch off here, and I'll do that. And Chris and I'll keep talking. So thank you so much, Tim, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Those classes that he's about to teach, super interesting. That Russian Revolution, which I think that's going to be super cool. And then the what was it? The transition from hunter-gatherer to what was it? Neolithic? Is that what it was? The transition? That transition?
Yes. Don't ask me too much, but yes. I mean, I've got my whole wading ape theory. Okay, this sort of didn't come from me. It came a bit from David Attenborough. But David Attenborough, and it's not a popular theory, but David Attenborough quite liked it. And the idea is that we were sort of spent a long time, and there are monkey apes that do this, and they'll wade and they'll be sort of upright as they're wading. So that sort of makes you go more upright. And then also it makes your skin go smooth like dolphins. To me, that's like sort of the no-brainer. And also we're so good at swimming. We've got slightly webbed fingers. I don't know. We do spend. I don't know. This is a bit that I don't know. We're very good at swimming, right? We're natural swimmers. We love swimming. And here's the key for me. This is a bit I thought is that when you're on a beach in a tropical scene, all right. And I've argued with my son. My son's friend said this is all sort of socialization, but I say when you're on a beach. So this is paradise. I'm on a beautiful beach. I can just sit here. I can go fishing. I can get fish out of the sea. I can eat the fruit off the trees. Hopefully there's a nice waterfall. What's ideal is what do we love? A waterfall going into the beach, because then we're getting fresh water right off the beach. And, we think this is paradise. Well, why do we think it's paradise? I think because we evolved to be in that situation. That's where we were. We were on the coast. We were like wading apes. And if you look at the genetic, like what they've shown through genetic analysis, is the human genome. It kind of moves at first out of Africa, and it sort of stays around like the coastal areas around India and through, and then goes down into the, the Aborigines in Australia. So they share this sort of same genetic link that sort of goes through Africa and southern India and everywhere. And that's kind of where we were. And what is that? That's all tropical beaches and paradise. So I just think, that we spent, and then there's another new book out. My friend Phil was telling me that says that we really did live in this sort of quite egalitarian society. So this is all stuff to talk about with Tim when he comes back. I don't know, the sort of state of the histories. You could go into a city or not in a city, and they didn't over farm things. They let it grow up, because they knew if they over farmed it, it wouldn't really take care of itself. So that they would sort of plant things so they would knew where to find things. So really, you have this idea of a sort of paradisical Garden of Eden. So as again, like in a lot of ways, that story of the Garden of Eden sort of somewhat does seem to actually tell you in a way what happened.
And is that in your book? Where's that in Itsy Bitsy Spider? Is my question. I think parts of it
it's in Where's the Mermaid? Because I drew. I have it on the wall. Okay, look. Okay, and I think I can show you some slides here because I've had this sort of set up now.
No, is that called the Aquatic Ape Theory?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah.
It's not very popular, but I don't know, but only because I think people are trying to say, well, it is, it's too good of a solution. We've got to find all reasons why it couldn't be real.
I mean, that does, so the aquatic ape theory is basically like a theory saying that the reason that we learn to walk upright, and the reason that our civilizations were by the water was because we were kind of like we spent a lot of time in the water before we
Yeah, in
hit
and out of the water. Yeah, much as dolphins were mammals that went back to the water, weren't they? They were dogs. And
Yeah, I
compared
mean,
to apes, we're quite dolphin-like.
I mean, I was telling my daughter this crazy thing. I said, whales were on the land. Well, first of all, like life started in the water, and then it came out on the land. And then whales went back into the water. So the whole, whatever it would be, like a billion-year timeline of whales was in the water for a long time, on the land, back into the water, which to me is
Yes.
bizarre because it seems like once you got on the land, you'd stay there. You wouldn't spend, I don't know how long, hundreds of millions of years evolving to go back into the water, especially when you have no gills. Can you imagine if aquatic man decided to evolve back into the water and we would just like come up with a blowhole on our neck?
Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Trying to show you a picture. The picture disappeared.
Yeah, I was going to say about your book, from the work that I've seen of yours, which is probably a pretty good slice at this point. I think you do a good job of making these kind of like human characters in the sense that they're not perfect, but they're human and they're decent, like they have and this is probably mostly from, is it Planet of Earth? Is that the main? No, it's Pewfell. Is that right? Am I saying that right?
Pewfell is my webcomic. Yes.
Okay, yeah. It's mostly from reading that stuff that I was like, these characters are kind of like, they're decent people, but they're human people. They're not like moralistically like idealized.
No. Yes. They're sort of they're more real. I don't know. I didn't really know. I didn't know all my philosophy. My philosophy is more well defined than when I wrote Pewfell. I didn't really know, so I was just trying to drawing what I saw. Pewfell, I think. Okay. So here's the image I'm showing now. Paradise Island from Where's the Mermaid?
Oh man!
And so like I just like these monkeys I did on the branch here. I did this. This was the last one of the last ones they did in Where's the Mermaid, and I sort of saved it to last because I was looking forward to drawing it. I thought it's going to be fun to do, and this is sort of like the idea of paradise. And I drew this branch here with these monkeys, and I guess I had that idea, and I found some monkeys I referenced, and then I just did them very sort of quickly, and I was really happy with how they came out because I did them super loosely, but they sort of really have a lot of movement and all that, so I sort of like them. And and I like their sort of coloration and all this. I like the way that I sort of given them sort of black noses and pink hands, and but that was kind of like the coloration that they have. And you actually probably have more variation. If I was doing it as a comic, I'd probably like to do them. But and I was sort of thinking, they live on a sort of island like this, and maybe the aliens are there from the future, like humans from the future. I always think those grey aliens. And every time I watch anything about UFOs and UFO documentaries, I'm so that like, okay, if you were to take all that as everything they say on those things are true, there's only one explanation that fits all the facts, and that is that they're us from the future, and they're coming back to protect us. This sort of time of human evolution needs a lot of protecting, but maybe we're coming to the end of that time now.
Are you saying that the aliens,
some sort of threshold, the singularity, once we cross it, then time will be forward and backwards. No space travel movie really ever gets it right about the time dilation effects of space travel. If you set off at the speed of light into space and come back, well, Carl Sagan talks about it in Cosmos. I saw that as a kid, and I was like, what? No science fiction really ever has done a story really about that, because you go off and you come back. If you came back to Earth, it's hundreds of thousands of years later, so you never come back. And you live in a universe where, this sort of linear idea of time that we're sort of tricked into by the sun going around the earth and making every day seem the same. And a day for an infant, living from, say, birth to 9 months old is the same as living from 40 to 80. So really we had our entire lives as children. And then we'd have a brief period where we have to take care of kids and we grumble about it a lot. All right, but yes, so I'm getting off the subject a bit, but I sort of had this idea that the aliens are sort of coming back, and humans have sort of evolved and devolved. They've messed it up, and then the apes are sort of living there, and they're living in paradise. So the strip's called Paradise, and they're sort of living on the beach, and that's the basic premise. And then you can have all sorts of things can happen because they can go through all time and space.
what time period is this illustration? Is this like current time, or is this?
So this is current time. So this is Paradise. So this is from Where's the Mermaid? So it's a magical story about the mermaids, but I've also got a lot in there about pollution and the environment and all this. So this actually comes from right off a spread where they've been to the Arctic, and there's pollution in the Arctic and all this sort of stuff. But again, environment, diversity, we can all get along. I follow this group Solar Punk. There's a lot of crazy ideas, but there are lots of very positive ideas. And the fact is that there are lots of solutions out there. If you want to sort of listen to them and find them, you can find the answers to your problems.
I mean, my answer is the Thanos snap.
And we are all very capable of solving. To the young people out there, Roger Dean said this, and I liked it a lot. He said to the young people out there listening, we are very capable of solving our problems, mankind. But, and actually we already sort of have the solutions, but, are we able to sort of open our eyes and see them?
Well, it's an interesting time right now. I think, what's going on, because you've got AI, right? Which is at this point, it's never been at. You've got population, which is at a point it's never been at. And in my opinion, this idea of organizing things around a nation state, the idea that like nation states are kind of like the dominant way of organizing power and maybe cultures and people, like the US, Russia, Europe, and stuff like that, that's kind of going away. And you're kind of having this new governance system emerge, which is like a real black box. Who knows what's going to happen with that? It's an interesting time. I suppose everybody thinks that they're living in some interesting point in history, but no one's ever been living in a point where, like, general intelligence was within grasp, for AI, general intelligence AI. No one's lived in that period except us. We're special.
Yes. Yes. Well, then we'll be the first. Yes. Well, there's well, Dale's got some interesting points here, and Dale, I think we're going to probably be able to get into some of that tomorrow. Dale's going to step up because you can't be here tomorrow, right, Chris?
I can't.
No. So yeah, Dale's going to step in.
You want to conference in my whole band, and we'll do a band meeting. It'll be a series of non sequiturs. We'll talk about your book, and then we'll talk about
what your band should come and play. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if your band can play at some point, that would be great.
Oh yeah, dude. We'd be totally down with that. I gotta say though, you might have to slap an NC17 rating on us or do some bleeping. We do say all the dirty words. It's mostly sexual content.
I think that's not very appropriate. I'd like to have some music on here. I don't know.
I'll tell you the offensive stuff we don't say. We're not. Let's see. We're not racist. Let's see. I don't know. Most of our stuff is dropping F-bombs. Well, no, we don't actually do that too much either. It's mostly sexual stuff.
Well, don't talk about things you don't do. As soon as you say, well, we're not racist, I immediately go, wait, are they?
Well, I guess what I'm saying is, I thought it'd be a shorter conversation talking about what we don't say that might possibly offend people than rather than what we do say. But mostly it's I don't know. It's all in play, and it's all kind of in terms of hip hop, right? Hip hop that, you got stuff that's like 2 Live Crew and NWA and anything goes. And man, rap can't get any more explicit these days than it was a couple decades ago. So we're kind of like the middle of the road there. We're not like radio friendly, but we're not like 2 Live Crew, for example. And we're not hard as you might realize. I'm only a third of the band, but as you can probably tell by my presence here, we're not hard. We're not gangsters.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. But that would be fun. I'll talk to the guys about it.
I wouldn't be any good. I wouldn't be much use as a gangster.
Oh yeah,
so I decided to not be a gangster. I made that decision.
I think you could totally. Well, you're saying you wouldn't be much use as a gangster, or
yeah, I would have been like, I wouldn't have been any good as a gangster.
Maybe you could just be like gangster support. You tell them they're doing the right thing, tell them they're top dog and that type of thing.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah, but then they probably wouldn't. Yeah, I'm probably talking about as being gangsters. Is that being a good gangster when you talk the other gangsters out of being a gangster? But then you'll be the one who goes to jail. You're in a gang. That's what you do. You'll be the one that takes the ball. You'll be the one. You'll be the only one locked up.
Yeah, how would you do that? What would your plan be for doing that? Would you just launch right into it? Hey, what you're doing, I don't think is a great idea. Or would you like get them 40s and and drive them around, be this designated driver, and then kind of slip it in over a period of weeks and months? Like, hey, you guys, have you ever think just for your consideration, have you thought about the future? Or would you just do the hard pitch immediately?
Well, no, I do like try to do the soft pitch. I don't know hard pitch, soft pitch. I don't know anything about pitching really. It's very confusing.
I don't know either, but I feel like if I'm dealing with people that have guns, I'll do the soft pitch initially, and if that doesn't go well, I'll do the no pitch, and then I'll do the pitch myself to a different place.
Well, yeah, I mean, I like the bit of going to a show and like a comic show and talking to people, seeing the people that come up. There's definitely something about sort of seeing people in real life. I don't know. Online is good too. It's better than nothing.
I know you've done Comic-Con. You've done Comic-Con at least one time, right? Probably many times. Yeah, because I went one year with you here in San Francisco.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yes. I don't do them a lot. I do them a bit. Yeah. Some people. Very good and go all the time. I was sort of slightly thinking, now I've got these books. Once I get this book out, maybe, and then I've got with this book, I've got a real sort of flagship product that I can peddle around. I've got all my other books, but there's sort of the other search books that are sort of my bestsellers, I guess, through other publishers. I have my webcomic Goofle books, but, that's a pretty niche audience. But it does, people like it. And then I've, the games and stuff I did, which I have some copies of, and they help make shows a bit more profitable. But actually, since my publisher died, Minion Games, I don't really know, that's sort of that's over. But then I'm doing a lot of work for Goodman Games, so right now. But that's a whole different world. Then I could start going more to sort of D&D sort of gaming conventions, which I haven't really done, like exhibiting. There are a lot of different shows I could do. There are like library shows. My friend Lex was telling me. Lex would be a good guest to come on.
I'm going to put them in the captions so we don't forget that.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. I don't think I know what I'm doing here. I'm trying to add, it's not working. But okay, Lex, make a note of that.
Yeah, I'll remember. Yeah. Well, there are lots of cartoonists I could reach out to if we keep doing this.
I like cartoonists because, my stereotype of them, is a positive one, and it's not a world I'm overly familiar with, but it seems like one of the jobs of a cartoonist is to do what kind of like a court jester does, which is maybe point out the absurdity and the truth of the world, but do it in like a lighthearted, non-confrontational way.
Well, that's interesting that you say that, because yes, definitely in US political cartoons are way softer than British ones. The British ones really go for the jugular, and that's been the tradition since Hogarth, who was considered the first sort of political cartoon. I guess I'm talking more about this sort of typical newspaper political cartoon.
Yeah, I did.
I hear they always tend to be generally much nicer. Nicer caricatures. The British ones really sort of tend to eviscerate them, maybe almost too much in the other direction. I don't know. So there's different, then there's obviously children's illustration, children's cartooning, the newspaper cartoons again. And I think in the US, because it's such mass market, it has to be more broad. This is the thing. It's how broad. For a mass market, it has to be very broad. Britain is a fairly small country. People are much more on the same sort of page. So there's a more, slang changes more quickly. Lots of things. Somebody comes at you with a new slang word in England, you just sort of adopt it right away. If somebody comes at you, if you go at someone in America with a new slang word, they're like, "What? Well, what's that?"
I can't keep up.
They always just get it right away.
Yeah, so America's 330 million, I think. What's England? Do you know?
About 50 million, I guess.
Wiki Break. So okay, yeah. I do notice that.
Dale's got comments on all this. Dale, I'm going to bring you in here because let's bring Dale in here because he's
okay.
He's part of this conversation.
If you do more
I'm sending you a link.
We need a full-time comment responder person, and since we don't have one, we just bring anybody with more than 5 comments. We just bring them in. So
well, it's just a morning chat. It's a morning chat. Like, otherwise, I'd be sitting here sort of scrolling through Facebook. So
that's not,
you know,
that's
I
not
think
a good
this is
stream,
better.
man. I'm just
Well,
telling
no,
you, that's not a good stream. That's that's what they call in the industry unlively stream, when you're just when your eyes are dashing over and you're making a whole bunch of clicks and you're not talking. So
yeah, well, I don't think we're a lively stream, but all right, Dale, I just sent you a link.
hey, do we have any theme music for you know, when we introduce somebody as like, do you want like, do you want me to do a drum roll? I get a snare drum over here to announce Dale's presence.
Yeah, well, we'll see if he
You know,
comes
when
in.
somebody walks on
I'm
like
pretty
a talk
scared
show
away
like
that the person
tonight.
listening to us now. He's like, I like to comment, but I don't want to come in. So he said he agreed he was going to come in tomorrow. So yeah, I think he'll come in. Oh, here he is. There he is. All right. He's still in bed. All right.
I think he's on. I think he's on the.
There he is. All right. He's still in bed. All right. Wait, you have to. I think you have to mute us now or something. You have to mute the stream. There he is. All right.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but you need to mute your computer. Like, you need to mute the stream. Like, stop. Just watch us and don't watch the stream. I can hear you, but you need to mute your computer. Like, you need to mute the stream.
Some
Like,
headphones.
just watch us and don't watch the stream. I can hear you, but you need to mute your computer. Like, he'll think. There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me, Dale?
I can hear you, and I am muting the mic when I am not talking.
Can you hear me, Dale? Dale, what you need to do is
I can hear me now.
the stream, because you're watching the stream
Muting the
too.
mic when I am not talking.
Can we send one of our technical directors over there and they can, like, you know, do what they do on a newscast, do the turning on and turning off?
All right, how's that? Can you hear me now?
It's way better over here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me, Dale?
So wait, so Chuck, where is Dale right now?
I believe I have turned off the stream that I was watching, so there won't be duplication. How can you hear me now?
Yes, very good. Got you. Good.
Sorry, technical glitch.
Dale, yes, what's going on? So you're down in San Jose, right?
I'm in San Jose, the armpit of Silicon Valley.
I'm loving Silicon Valley on HBO right now.
I haven't been there for years. Last time I was there, I saw a professional Muay Thai event. And all I remember is people blasting air horns around me, but it was actually pretty fun.
San Jose is not a bad place. There used to be more geek stuff, but we still have a lot of comic book shops. We have Streetlight Records. We have Rasputin Records. We have Time Tunnel Toys. That's a must stop. And, you know, beyond that, it's just kind of a boring suburb. We have one convention that's going to try to start up again, which is the San Jose Toy Show, which is a lot of fun. If you're ready to start going back to cons.
Well, I'm wondering if I should start doing them like on a sort of more regular basis, at least locally, and then maybe sort of like, and then plan a national tour.
The problem is, I don't think that there are any Comic Cons in the Bay Area anymore. I mean, WonderCon went to Anaheim. I've never really seen a con take off in the Bay Area, and I really didn't dig the Silicon Valley Comic Con. Big Wow was the last good con.
I like the Silicon Valley Con.
Okay, well, I respectfully disagree with you.
What didn't you like about it?
A lot of people who would normally go to a Bay Area con didn't. I usually judge a con. I usually judge a con on the dealer's room, and there were a lot of dealers who abandoned the Silicon Valley Comic Con. If Stuart N. Books from Torrance, California, goes to a convention, it's a good convention.
How do you explain? I'm not like a visual artist, but like how it's like to me, it seems like the Bay Area would be a great place for this.
Is that me?
What do you think's going on?
It's money. San Jose doesn't even. Well, the nerds. There's still enough of them to support comic book stores, but technology. A number of bookstores have left. University Art, which was our big art supply store on Meridian, the owners discovered they would make more money just leasing the building to another business. I think it's an Indian motorcycle dealership now. If you want practical art supplies, you either have to go to San Mateo, to California Art Supply, which is a great store, or University Art, or you go over the hill to Santa Cruz to Lens Art, which is a classic, and then there's Palace Art Supply and Stationery, which is in Capitola, which is near Santa Cruz. Or you go up to Oakland to Flax or to San Francisco. There's also a Dick Blick in Berkeley and Dick Blick in San Francisco. But
what is it called?
You really are an art supply expert. I always thought you were just kidding there with your title, but you're really. You really do know about your art supply stores.
That's been my whole career. I worked for Flax in college, and then I worked briefly. I never took a paycheck home, and I worked for Michaels. And then when I went to digital art, I worked for Computerware, and then I worked for
Yes,
Apple.
I knew you'd worked for Computerware. Yes, and you end up managing all the Computerware stores in the Bay Area at one point.
I managed one Computerware store in their phone center. And then I ended up at Apple as a flunky.
Okay.
But my hobby is art supplies. My goal in life is to buy and ruin as many art supplies as possible.
That's my daughter might compete with you on that. I think she uses all of her brushes one time. She's very much into using them, not so much into cleaning them out. So they got about 3 uses.
Well, that's normal. You never clean your brushes. That's just a scam.
So she's doing it right.
Oh yeah, You just buy new brushes every time.
Yeah, that's what's happening, kind of.
Yeah, there's a lot of mythology. It's like putting liquids in your car, like oil and radiator fluid. That's just a scam to sell that stuff.
I thought so. That never made sense to me. It's like what Chris Rock says. You don't make your money on the first sale. It's the comeback. And they want me to put oil in this thing every 5,000 miles. It's a perfect scam.
Well, I don't know. I think that makes sense. That's
kidding,
like you got to. So in health, you've got to stay juicy. You've got to drink your fluids. It's all about your fascia. I learned about fascia. I'm going to have Annika. We're going to have yoga with Annika. I'm not sure when she's coming. I think she's going to come week after next. But the fascia. You got to say this is a real fascia. Look, the doctors, they came on the radio. This was on Science Friday, and they go, "Oh, we've discovered a whole new organ in the human body." Like, okay, what? All right. We found a whole new organ in the human body. And they go, yeah, well, it's the fascia. We always sort of knew it was there, but we didn't really think it was an organ. Because whenever we cut up a body, it was just this sort of white connective tissue. So we thought it was just connective tissue. Now we realize that when your body's not being cut up by a doctor, it forms this sort of elastic collagen layer that sort of surrounds and protects everything. And, it does all the things in the body that we didn't really know how they were being done. First of all, it's like gives your muscles something to push against. Without the fascia, your muscles sort of don't have something to push against. So it sort of helps you with your movement. But the other thing that like the sort of most standing thing was that they said that it exactly maps to acupuncture meridians. So clearly this is the system that acupuncture has been working on. So this is sort of a big unification of Eastern medicine and Western medicine. The Eastern medicine is still going on, an sort of empirical method, and Western medicine we have. We've got very, we have the scientific. It's more scientific, so it's also empirical. But we sort of discounted the magical aspect, and like a lot of Chinese sort of philosophy, feng shui, what are these? There's this sort of practical aspect, and then there's a sort of mystical aspect. So the mystical, so there's a more sort of openness to that. And in Western medicine, we've slightly sort of said, well, there's placebo effect. We understand that. We try to discount placebo effect in our things because we're looking at the big numbers. But on any individual case, you can't really say. So it's a lot about your sort of motivation and your belief. But, also understanding like this about fascia. Well, there's certain things that like Chinese medicine, we don't get enough bitter in our diet, for example. There's this thing, bitter melon, that's very popular, but, it could be like the heart of a romaine lettuce or something like that. Real bitter stuff. That's very good for you. These things keep you juicy. An apple a day keeps a doctor away. That really helps, keep you juicy and joyful. And the other thing that it really likes is movement and stretching. So this is related to things like computer strain injury and RSI and, all this. So, stretching though is what helps. It's what helps heal a joint. Like if you have a joint that's sort of arthritic or stiff, the tendency is like, I need to protect it, which you sort of do. Like say for example, a computer splint. I learned this. You don't want you get injured from sort of doing this and wiggling your finger, moving around. So the splint sort of helps hold it sort of straight, so that protects it. But it won't really cure your behavior too much. The cure of your behavior needs to be the sort of intention that I'm going to really try and almost be like a Thunderbird puppet. I sort of feel like, and it sort of really goes to your shoulders. You have to sort of sit upright. Kneeling chairs things are good, and then you can sort of, do this. Because I think as artists, this is very important because we are really sort of sitting there for a long time, doing the same thing over and over. And yes, and I encountered it. But then there are sort of places, right? There was an office I worked at in Marin over in Mill Valley, and it was sort of like a sort of new building. It was a low, and it was sort of dark and cramped, and they said, and I got this really bad RSI in there. This was when I was quite young, first year, so sort of 26 or 27 or something, maybe 28 actually, a bit older. And then they said, oh yes, everybody here gets sick. So there's definitely, well, in Chinese medicine, again, there's this sort of the aspects of feng shui, like your environment, and arrangement, you need to sort of, there are all these things. For example, I have mirrors behind my computer because I have the screen behind me, and I didn't have on my desk because it's bad to have your desk to the door. And there's a sort of practical aspect because you're sort of slightly nervous if your back's to the door because you don't know who's ever going to be sort of creeping up behind you. Whether you know it or not, you don't. And actually, that's another thing about fascia. Is the fascia is the thing that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. That's how you know when somebody's looking at you. It's your body brain that, and then you go, and somebody's staring at you. You knew it. So that's what I'm going to say on that subject.
I wanted to get back to bitters. Can I get the medicinal benefit of bitters by using the bitters that I might put in a mixed drink? Can that be medicinal? Can it be anything?
Well, definitely. I mean, I think they're concocted as a medicinal thing. I don't know how much is good. Oh, well, my favorite comedy movie of all time, Clown, with Frank Ham, Danish movie, recommended with reservations. So I love it. But there's a whole bit where they're drinking Unterberg and they're trying to collect all these Unterberg bottles. They got a busload of kids on a school tour.
Is that
it's terrible? They're the most terrible behavior. It's fantastic. I love that, and the whole show. If you can see the show, Clown, KLOVN, absolute gold.
Is that like what I imagine to be like a German bitter or something? Like
yes. Unterberg is like little German bitters. Those little bottles. Like yeah. I think you can get it around here.
If you go to a Hofbrau in the United States, like Harry's Hofbrau, that when you take your friends, you dare everyone to drink that bottle. No one drinks that willingly in the United States.
It's not really something you don't want to drink large amounts.
I'm taking something right now that is incredibly bitter, and it's herb. I don't think it's a Chinese herb. It's called copa. I think it's just called copa for short, but there's a longer scientific, like whatever it is, Latin scientific naming of it. A bacopa is what it is. And that
Ooh.
stuff is like the most bitter stuff. And this is a tincture. It's incredibly bitter.
We got a comment here from Davey Murray. He says the apple a day slogan was developed during US prohibition for apple consumption, because previously apples were mostly sold for cider. I love it. That's a very interesting fact. But, you know, there you go. Alcohol, though, does dry you out. Not that I'm in favor of prohibition, but, you know, that is not one of those things that's not good for your fascia, like sort of smoking, you know, popcorn, they say, is very dangerous. It really dries you out.
When you say
and the
fascia,
drying out is related to fascia, yeah.
Are you getting back to this organ? The
fascia. Yes. Well, in Chinese medicine, they talk a lot about things that dry you out, like alcohol, smoking. For some reason, apparently, popcorn's very dangerous.
I feel like people should be speaking more about the positive benefits of alcohol. You know, I mean, I do.
Well, yeah, we did talk about this yesterday.
I'm half joking. I'm half joking, but I'm half serious about this. I think alcohol is a bit like
I'm writing a children's book, yeah. But all right, no, but you know, the show is for the mums. I don't expect there's any children watching. Well, I'm talking to, you know, parents who are educated and concerned about, you know, what's going on and wanting their kids to read something suitable. And my book is approved by an elementary school teacher in the US, Karen. You know, she's read my book and she says it's fine for elementary schools. Just so you know.
I should get your book over to I have a cousin that's a school teacher, and I think she got Pocketful of Frosting too. I should get her a copy maybe. She's in. Actually, I'm going down to Austin next week, as you know, and I'll be visiting her. So it's probably too short notice, but I believe she is still teaching elementary school kids, like probably about the right age group. Although I think the age group for this is quite wide, right?
But yes, the age group is everybody. But I think, you know, I mean, I've certainly, you know, some really small children can like these. You know, they can sort of be like among the first books that children look at. You've got little board books, but, you know, the big, broad picture means that there's a lot of time for them to sort of go around and they start looking at it and they start asking you questions. So I formatted it in a format to sort of read with young children. But I think, you know, even if you like, but the images went in the newspaper. You know, they were for all ages, for adults to look at as well, like family, you know, and they do. And a lot of times, you know, I like to look at this with my grandchildren. You know, that's a popular comment I got on Amazon, you know, or kids, you know, different ages. It's something you can take in the book and read it. So take in the car, you know, it's not a screen, but, you know, yeah, all ages can enjoy the sort of puzzles because it's like searching and finding. So it's a puzzle. Like people like to do it. There are people called super spotters that the police now know about, and they recruit super spotters. They can look at a picture of a crowd, like a photograph, and they go, there's the guy or the woman or whoever, you know, they'll spot them like in a crowd, you know, they can do that. So I don't know if that's exactly the same skill, but, you know, it's sort of, you know, again, it's just about sort of scanning and looking. There's no words like Dale's Facebook decided Dale and I should be friends. We seem to have a lot of things in common, including a lot of Sergio Aragonés, you know, who he's probably the artist who's most, you know, in the US. I mean, he's actually from, is he born in Spain and lives in Mexico and came to the US? He was born in
Spain, and his parents left because of the Civil War, and he spent most of his life in Mexico until he came to the United States and ended up working for Mad.
Yes, took his sort of portfolio to Mad magazine and started doing all the little marginal cartoons in Mad magazine. Is probably what most people would like instantly know him for. But he would do these sort of very big, sort of kind of crazy scenes, and he's quite a loose style, but maybe more like I was doing with the sort of Where's the Mermaid, where I was sort of doing them quicker, you know, versus earlier where I was doing them a little more sort of slowly and planned, you know. So it's sort of interesting, you know, but he's about telling the story, you know. And this is what I didn't really like about sort of Where's Waldo, was it didn't tell much of a story, you know. It was just the puzzle aspect, which I do love the puzzle aspect of these things, but, you know, I always want mine to have more of actual story, even if it's a bit of a nonsense story. I mean, you know, and again, we talked a bit about that yesterday.
So there's kind of an arc of the spider, like a narrative arc of this spider from the beginning to the end.
It's you know, the spider and the fairy tale characters have sort of entered. They're contestants in a talent contest, and they enter the talent. They win the talent contest. They sort of embark on a world tour and become celebrities. And you know, by the end, they're all tired and it's time to go home to bed.
What I like about crowd scene mural comics like Sergio Aragonés, Chuck Whalen, and there's any number of other cartoonists who are doing things similar to this. Is the good ones have, like Chuck and Sergio, there's little stories, little gags sprinkled throughout this. So it's not just a group of people standing around. You can find a little knot of people and see a little story being acted out. And I love looking at that. Of course, I just read them now to steal ideas and techniques. There's, for adults, most adults don't draw, but it exposes people to the cartoon language, which is not taught in school. We pick it up just by reading cartoons, and what we don't realize is that we're learning symbols and simplified art techniques that allow us to understand cartoons.
Yes, that's a key part of cartooning. Yes, the sort of symbols and the language. I believe more was it? I think it was Beetle Bailey artist.
Dick Brown, I think.
Well, there's Dick Brown's Hagar the Horrible. Was he the Dick Brown? Well, one of those guys.
Oh, I know. Yeah, not Dick Brown. I'm trying. Mort Walker.
Mort Walker. Yes, I think it was Mort Walker coined the term emanata for like the little things that come out, of your character, which you can't do that in classical painting. You can't have. But in a cartoon, you can sort of do all these sort of very expressive things. So it becomes almost like its own kind of writing. And every cartoonist draws differently. Everybody does everything differently. But cartooning, you're trying to like some, thinking about have a New Yorker cartoon where it's sort of super loose. And in fact, the more well drawn it is, in a way, sort of less funny it is. Funnier if it's looser. Then there's a sort of more advertised, like a polished sort of illustrated, advertised sort of version that's very sort of cleaned up and doesn't have any of those sort of roughness. But there's something about the roughness, and I'm like, someone like Quentin Blake, who would illustrate the Roald Dahl books, he would sort of say, no, you have to just go right in pen and do it. No sort of sketch, and he's not doing anything, you know what you're looking at. There's no doubt. It's very simple. There's not much there, but somehow it's sort of full of life and the story is there. So it's like really comes down to the story, I think, a lot with this, which is different from the, the representational aspects of art, which was the goal before photography, I suppose. That's the way I always understood it. Photography came along, and then representational art became less. But, then there's sort of, there's always things to be done. There's never, artists don't stop finding new ways to do things.
Cartooning is more of an emphasis on line than illustration, and someone like Quentin Blake or Cyril, what's his first name? I can't remember. The guy who did.
Ronald Searle.
Yeah, Ronald Searle.
Yes. Oh, yeah, great. I had a little book of his. My dad had some books of Ronald Searle, and then the Penguin Charles Adams that I would look at a lot growing up. Yeah.
But there's an emphasis on line, and Searle has these amazing expressive lines. Quentin Blake has expressive line. Hunt Emerson, who
he was great. He was like slightly younger generation.
But
and he was more into underground comics. Yeah, he was very, his drawings had a lot of appeal. Like what Disney calls appeal. They're just sort of very likable. But he was quite, in the underground zone of all the stories he was telling.
Yeah, I like to think that there's actually a school of a look of comics that I like. Like if you guys are familiar with Larry Gonick, Sergio Aragonés, I think Chuck is part of it.
Chris isn't, no.
I'm not.
Slides. We need slides for these things.
Yeah,
these are all people who I would call the Big Nose school of cartooning.
Yeah, the Big Nose school of cartooning, yes. Yes, because there's a thing, I think, did Scott McCloud say that, or somewhere I read that characters with big noses are more likable in cartoons for some reason.
I heard you say that.
I think that a lot of that is sort of socialization and what you're sort of used to. But yeah, I think there's something about that, I think.
Do you remember years ago when we were working together and you had done a cartoon for something at work? It was like a contest, and you had drawn a few of our coworkers, and one of them was this like woman coworker of ours, and you had drawn her, with a big nose, thinking this is flattering in the comic world. It makes you likable. And when she saw it, she immediately like objected to it. And then you were trying to explain to her how this was a good thing, and in the context of comics, it meant you were friendly. Do you remember any of this?
Well, I don't remember, but it got baked in that I understood, I mean, it's difficult, as you go, you learn what you can sort of get away with different. I mean, probably, yes. The old stereotype, let's say an Asterix book, the guys all have big noses and the women all look, cute and pretty, or old bags. So I don't know. I mean, I've always tried to sort of do something more in the middle. It's kind of funny. When I was younger, I used to do a lot of things that look more non-gendered. And I think I would actually get more comics to make things look more gendered. But that wouldn't happen now, so, definitely. So in a way, that's sort of a little easier. Because I think, I do think that a lot of these things are just sort of constructs that, you learn, there's sort of things that you learn as a kid, and it's very hard to, do them differently. You like it, and that works, and that's good. And, that's just nice. That's just natural humans, how we all do things differently.
You mean like
you have to accept that other people want to do things their way too. And if it's not hurting you directly. But the trouble is then someone comes along and says, no, what they're doing is hurting you. You have to go kill them. We've got shorter resources, which I don't think is true. I think we have abundant resources.
When you say
we have a whole universe full of resources. And as far as we know, so far, we're the only thing here, like vast. How can you say there's a shortage of resources when you have a vast universe full of resources and it seems to be all for us?
When you're saying constructs, do you mean like constructs and like how you would draw something?
Well, like in the big nose school, you start with the nose because everything hangs off the nose.
Interesting. I've seen a lot of kids, including my own, that will, I think, instinctually start with eyes, but she didn't. I mean, she's been through quite a bit of like visual art stuff, but not around drawing comics. But she went through this period where all she did were eyes. Sometimes it was just a single eye, and she'd build out from eyes, which I thought was interesting. And you're saying so it's kind of a traditional thing in comics to start off with the nose and build around the nose.
Well, that's just me. I've drawn entire comic panels starting with the nose.
Because I think the eyes is generally more usual. I remember Richard Williams talking about that one time, that he always started with the eyes. We mentioned him the other day, the animator of Roger Rabbit. All right, I'm going to do a little drawing here, but keep the conversation going.
I mean, to me, it just seems like it's the first thing you do when you meet somebody new or familiar is you look at their eyes. It seems like that's like the first point of contact. Although I did know this girl, and she said the first thing she looked at on a guy were his shoes, which I thought was kind of weird. We had about a half-hour discussion about that because it made zero sense to me, but I guess some women are really into shoes. But I thought it was their own shoes that they were typically into. Unless she's trying to figure out what this guy's taste is. It was interesting because it caught me so off guard. I said, this must be awkward a lot because most people, when you meet them, they're thinking you're going to look somewhere around here. If you look at their shoes, it could give them the wrong impression. Like perhaps you're not into meeting them. I don't know.
No, I like looking at the nose because that's one thing to look at. And people think that you're looking at them in their eyes, but you're looking at their nose. So you don't have to meet their eyes.
Yeah, I don't. It seems like if you were looking at them, you'd probably just be looking at one eye. I don't know.
Yeah.
Your eyes are kind of like this. I think human eyes like to find this kind of like focal point, what is it like? I was watching this show on the human eye, and they were saying like you can really only get like focused vision on this little tiny part of your visual field. I mean, it was really small. I don't know, it's like maybe 5% of your total like sphere of vision, which goes out almost almost goes out like 180 from.
Oh yes, and then your brain fills in the gaps.
Yeah,
the brain tells you what you saw where you didn't see anything. That's the thing. That's how magic works, right? Magicians know that if you're not looking at it, your brain will fill it in as if it was there, even though it isn't there, right? Because your brain isn't actually looking at it. Your brain is looking at something else. If they're looking at that, it literally cannot see the other thing.
That happens with music as well as, like, you were talking about just drawing figures that are kind of like sloppy. They're like a group of lines put together, but we're so good at reconstructing things we're familiar with that we just reconstruct all the missing parts of it. The same thing's true in, like, if you take a major scale in music, people are so used to hearing that scale, at least they are in the West, that if you drop out a note and you ask them, hum what we just did, people will add it right back in there. It's like it's a pattern that their brain is so familiar with, they just can put it. I don't know. And it's cognitive laziness, maybe.
Well, we're taught to recognize patterns. If you look at the drawing that Chuck has up on the screen, a lot of these faces, they have very understated, underdrawn noses, and in some cases just a couple of dots for eyes. But we know this pattern because we're hardwired to look at faces. You combined lines and dots in the right pattern, we can't help but seeing it as a face.
Yeah, and it's and if you change the arrangement of these, like, dots and lines, even though they can be, like, really simple, just a tiny bit, because we're so in tune with human emotions. I was explaining this to my daughter, who's was telling me how difficult it is to draw faces, and I said, yeah, it's because, like, this is probably one of the most in tune things humans are, and just a little change of the eyebrow can change the emotions, and that's what makes it really difficult. You draw a hill and you draw a few more saplings on the left side of it, and it doesn't, hills don't have that emotional content. At least they don't to humans. Maybe if you're a tree, maybe you could look at a hill and tell if it's happy or healthy, but for humans,
Well, cartoonists have an advantage because we can steal from other cartoonists. So,
is that happening right now?
You can have a mirror next to your drawing table to make a face, to get the reference. You can go on Google and find a face, like Google for angry face, or you have a stack of comics from someone who you admire, and you look at the formulas they use. Everybody's influenced.
Yes, you can do that, and there's a sort of learning aspect. We were all, like, studying from the masters. That's a way to learn. But again, I was sort of told also, and I think you can easily just sort of go and you can follow a well-established path, and that's the best way to get on and have an easy, happy life. Or you can choose to be an explorer and just be like, well, I'm not really going to listen to what anybody else says. I'm just going to do my own thing.
Yep.
Which is it's in some ways easier, in some ways harder. So it's just a choice.
Yeah, me and Chuck had this discussion yesterday, Dale, where we talked about kind of like on the one extreme side, kind of going your own route and forging your own path, and the difficulties with that, and your kind of chances of success, and then the other extreme, which is just you try to emulate what gets you paid and what is recognized and established as great. For a musician, that means being like a studio musician, and there's pros and cons to each one. But I was explaining to Chuck that I'm just no good at, I just found out really early on I'm not really that adept at, like, copying styles. I'm just like, that's not my thing. I've worked with musicians that can sight read really well, or pick things up extremely fast, and they can play. Some of those guitar virtuosos like Joe Satriani he can cop a lot of different styles. He's just amazing at it. But I figured out pretty early that's not me. So I feel like I didn't really have that option to go with.
Joe Satriani, I like him. That's good. Yeah.
Well, something like Chuck's books. If you're giving a kid one of these books and they really like it, whether they realize it or not, they're subconsciously picking up formulas from Chuck. They're seeing, this is a cartoon face, this is a cartoon arm, this is how you do detail. And if they ever try to do it themselves, they've learned some things by looking at these books. People are influenced, not necessarily always directly, but also indirectly. I read years of Sergio Aragonés or Antonio Projas or Gary
Spy versus Spy, yes.
Or Berkeley Breathed. And that comes out. I'm sure you listen to music and consciously or unconsciously, there may be riffs that you're coming up with that were influenced by stuff you heard as a kid.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, okay, and here's one thing that you maybe think of, that really the big thing, like in these particular search books and stuff, is that the biggest influence is going to be, the parents. So, this is what is great about them, is that they're like all these different things to sort of discuss. And, I'm not really sort of giving, I'm just sort of showing the stories. And some kids like to make up the stories, but, the parent is going to sort of influence and explain, and there's things to discuss. And, I'm trying to be very careful of the limit of what could be shown and what's appropriate to show and what's not appropriate to show to all ages, and I mean that there are certain societal limits that I think, are there for good reasons. So, I just, but you have to discuss things, and the sooner that you introduce topics, then the easier it is to understand them. And it's no good trying to sort of avoid a topic if it comes up, because everybody gets older. That's the thing. I mean, part of growing up is exactly, growing up and learning things and, hopefully ending up as some sort of adult you can function in the world.
Chuck, do you get feedback from parents? I mean, is this a book are these books something that the parents give the kid and don't interact with the kid? Or is this something that both the parent and the child enjoy looking at the book together and having a shared experience?
Well, it's both, I think, but how kids are. If they have a favorite book, they want to look at it again and again every night. And these books will drive you mad because they'll, find lots of different things. But I try and make them so there are different ways that you can come back to it. You can follow this character's story or that character's story. There are always sort of 10 characters in the book. And then in the back, there are lists of extra things to spot. And then I use those to sort of give names to some of the different things. So you can sort of say this and you say, oh, that's what that is. Or it sort of expands a little bit more on some of the details of the story. So you can really go, the one that has the most story is Where's the Mermaid? That's got many layers of story sort of going on. This one's a little more straightforward because I've sort of made it from these sort of different scenes that I've put together. But I still think, actually they all sort of hang together quite well. And, so I've just made it a little story about sort of fame and celebrity, really.
So while I've been watching you draw, I noticed that you were drawing some robots in a building on the left-hand side. And there's a tank now with some little character inside of the tank.
I think that, who knows? I read a good science fiction story. There's a great one that's going around right now about, how robots, I actually wasn't thinking of this when I did it, but robots, that like the advanced AIs, they cease to function at a certain level because you need a human consciousness. For whatever reason, they don't have a living consciousness. So once they sort of reach a level of consciousness, they cannot function unless there is a human there to observe them. Right, so they have to trap us inside them, and gradually they evolve us into really just the essential organs that they need in order to be able to find and hunt down the rest of us. But they need to have that there because without a human observer, they would just cease to function because of the quantum physics effect. So it's a crazy story. It's the most disturbing AI story It's quite new and it's just sort of doing the rounds right now. But I don't really think about that. I'm also thinking about like the back to tank. But I'm thinking I'm doing this because you're talking and I haven't planned this at all. Like normally I would sort of plan a drawing a little bit more and I would have sort of,
well,
this
that's
one I haven't
what I was
even really
going to ask.
I'm just going right in for fun. And, I'm doing space. So it's all a little bit middle, it's a random melange, this particular scene. So I really don't need to think about it because it's space. And, who knows, whatever you want to think is going on, that'll do.
So you're just coming up with these characters in details on the fly. There's no underdrawing.
I've got a little folder called like my Earth space reference folder that just of various images I've collected together. So some of these are sort of different characters and things, modifying.
Well, I see that you have not violated the BBC's copyright with that Dalek-like creature.
Yes, I was looking at a Dalek, and I'm like, okay, it's got 2 eyes.
Wait, which creature is that? Is that the creature with the big lips and the 2 antennae?
No, the one of this guy here.
Yeah, there's a lot of sci-fi cliches in this that are filtered through an avoidance of stealing.
Yes,
I like that.
I just sort of feel like when I was doing my sort of Earth space comics, I was just sort of filling up a folder. I don't know. I originally was going to do this image as a sort of maybe as a cover for the Earth space book, but I didn't really. I didn't really. It was going to be a lot of work, so I'll do it. I'll repurpose it, and it's going to be in Where's the Monster if I get that one done. But I've had it sitting around for a while, so I thought, oh well, this is a good time just to do it. Because I was thinking, well, I'd like to try just doing this sort of live streaming and see how it goes. And if I was just doing black and white, I'd probably do more black because I'm going to color it. I'm doing less black, I suppose.
I'm going to save all my technical questions for tomorrow when I talk to you.
Yeah. Well, what are we at? We're at 10:30 now. I don't know. I wouldn't mind doing this a bit longer. I don't know. How are you guys doing?
I mean, I could go for a little bit longer. I should probably get off at 11.
We're down to one viewer. Hello, viewer. Is that viewer?
I brought this up with Chuck yesterday, Dale. I was saying, have you ever watched Painting with John? I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's on Hulu. He was in a punk band, I think, in the 90s, and then he got cancer, and he kind of moved to, I think it's Central America, and it's just him and probably a small film crew and the people that help him at his house, and he paints through it, and this vaguely reminded me of that show, which is actually a really good show. It's super chill. It's got a feel. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen any of that.
I have Hulu. I haven't watched it yet. I forget the name. Oh, now I remember. It's Bob Ross, the painter. Of course, I grew up watching him.
Oh yeah.
I know that Chuck has been watching Roger Dean.
Yeah, have you seen this? This is
Japanese. But I love watching people do art. It's when you're an art student, that's your entertainment, is watching an artist paint or draw, and ideally hear them curse under their breath. Because it makes you
think about this Japanese Doctor Who. It's a Japanese Doctor Who book cover. So some Doctor Who book or something that's being done in Japan.
I don't connect that to Doctor Who at all, but I'm not that familiar. All I know is the BBC series, I think, from the 70s.
Yeah. Well, he goes around in the blue police box, but I guess they did it in a red phone box. They didn't really know what they were doing.
They didn't know what color.
But I love that just sort of
like a Japanese artist. But wait, is that Darth Vader down there?
Well, I don't know if they're supposed to be Daleks. I think they are Daleks.
What's a Dalek? Is that like a Vader character?
Yeah. A Dalek is 10% of the United Kingdom's gross national product.
Oh, no, sorry, Dalek, yeah.
Now I'm just getting more confused.
A Dalek is a classic villain from Doctor Who, and at the time, Doctor Who was originally a children's show, and this was a villain in a children's show. It's the most dangerous alien in the universe, and it can't climb stairs.
There they are, going across London Bridge.
Yeah.
Those are sort of different generations of Daleks, but yeah, they've got around. They're sort of the opposite. Doctor Who's like sort of smart and clever, and he doesn't use violence, and he's nice. And Daleks are sort of the exact opposite of him, in that they're sort of stupid and nasty, and they've had all the emotions. They've actually got like a little organism inside. They once started off like human beings, but their origin story eventually became that this guy Davros sort of created them. But they basically were like humans, and then they became like they had all the evil bred out of them. I'm sorry, all the other emotions bred out of them except for hate. So they hate and they just want conquest. So they're basically sociopaths. They're totally, but they're a bit stupid, and they always sort of do the same thing. They come up with sort of clever plans to try and catch the Doctor, but of course they never can, because he's always cleverer, and he has his friends to help him.
They're an upside down garbage can.
And they're like us in our cars, really. That's what they are. We all, when we get behind the wheel of a car, we turn into a little sociopath, or we go onto the internet, into the comment forums, that we're like anonymous in our protective. They're basically, they're tanks. They're humans' tanks. They're cars. They are a tank. That's what they are. They shoot. They've got one thing for grabbing and moving you about, one thing for shooting you.
I know all this because San Jose has a huge history of Doctor Who.
Yes. Well, because of the tech nerds. Nerds always love Doctor Who because, it's the only, it's the longest running science fiction. So all the other science fiction, Doctor Who, and it still is. And the thing is, people get upset with it because it's basically always a kid's show. So people get a bit annoyed when they become adults and they're still watching a kid's show.
So we're talking
about up a little bit, and then they'll reset it and it'll go back to a kid's show again.
We're talking about the same thing. This British show in the 70s that's live people. It's not animated.
Yes.
That one with the guy in the trench coat and.
Yes. So to cover the fact they need different actors to play Doctor Who over the years, he regenerates. So he's not Doctor Who's not a human. There were some Doctor Who movies where they changed the story really, but he's an alien. In fact, he's now a she. His latest generation of Doctor Who, he regenerated, and now Doctor Who's a woman, and she's great. But of course that caused a lot of fuss, but it was probably one of the least ridiculous things that's ever happened, or least unlikely ridiculous things that happened on that show.
That he turned into a woman. That's one of the least ridiculous things.
Yeah, I mean, it's like an alien's done all these things. I mean, God knows what things have happened on that show. Having a sex change.
And so this is still on air for like 40 years later. Like
there was
yes. They've also had a black female Doctor Who like running around. She's like some future version of Doctor Who who's been popping up a few times. I don't know. I guess I've always watched it. I have a good friend, my good friend Peter.
Are they open to suggestions? Could I do like a Neuralink Doctor Who? Let's see. That'd be my at the front of the line, I think.
Well,
when I look at this picture, I have to think of my friend Peter. So he was our dads worked together in London, and I would go up, and he lived in London, and he'd come and stay with us in the summer in the country, and then I would go up like Christmas and Easter and stay with them up in London. And Peter was a massive Doctor Who fan, and this was sort of Tom Baker era, and he had his mum sew like question marks into his shirt, and she knitted him like a really long scarf that he would get around, and he'd walk around London like this and get comments, and if he got bad comments, he would make chicken noises at people. And this went on far too long. Definitely, I don't know. I was probably like a year or so older than him. It's definitely an era where like I hit puberty, and I was like, "Oh my god!"
You think any of this?
And it's funny when he hit puberty, it all disappeared. It completely changed. But he still loves Doctor Who, and he watches it all. And it's funny because the David Tennant Doctor Who always reminded me a lot of him. So yeah, I thought David Tennant Doctor Who. I think David Tennant is probably, other than Tom Baker, David Tennant's my favorite, and I really like Martha Jones. I think she might be my favorite assistant, but I also like Leela a lot. Controversially,
I kind of only remember probably one Doctor Who. I don't think that was widely shown in the U.S. I don't remember having a whole lot of access to it. I mean, when I grew up, it was kind of 3 stations for a while. And then if at some point, if you wanted to get that cable box, the thing with a slider and 100 channels, and a physical connection to the TV, you could spring for that. I'm not sure my parents always did. Most of that was not so great. Yeah, I don't remember Doctor Who being on heavy rotation when I was
Doctor
a kid.
Who. How old are you, may I ask?
51.
Okay, I'm older. I'm 56. In the 70s, Doctor Who spread throughout the United States by PBS series, and we were all introduced to Tom Baker's Doctor Who. And in the 70s and the 80s, all the Star Trek fans, all the Star Wars fans, they all ended up discovering Doctor Who. And so you would start seeing that at science fiction conventions and comic book conventions. And there was also other British sci-fi that was coming over, like Red Dwarf, which is hilarious. Which is Doctor Who influenced. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the dramatization, that came over and that was represented. So, but it's just something that filtered into sci-fi and comic culture here in the Bay Area and probably throughout the United States, because all the PBS stations eventually started carrying British sci-fi because it got fans and it got people to donate to the stations. In San Jose, Channel 54 had on Sundays all the sci-fi nerd stuff: Blake 7, Doctor Who, The Prisoner, Red Dwarf, and then oddball things that there were one-shots, like I can't remember, there was a time traveler story, but it's just something part of nerd culture. You go to comic book stores in the Bay Area, not so much now, but there would be Doctor Who toys. I worked at Apple. We always had a sonic screwdriver in the repair room in case we needed it. In fact, that was one of the things I would keep at the Genius Bar, would be a sonic screwdriver and a rubber chicken, because I could usually fix a Mac at the Genius Bar 50% of the time by waving a rubber chicken over it.
Does that mean restarting it?
It's usually some sort of user error, but if you put on the show, like wave the rubber chicken over it and chant things, it makes someone feel less stupid that it was just a mistake they made.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yeah. You make. Yeah.
Right.
I highly recommend repair people having rubber chickens and know how to perform ceremonies.
No, I totally get that. Probably, I don't know if that's off-putting to walk into a Genius Bar. Nobody wants to figure out how stupid they are as a user. Yeah.
That was the dumbest genius in the whole company.
Yeah, I mean, I went in there at some point because I couldn't resolve it at home, and so I went into a San Francisco Genius Bar, and basically their solution was do it the Apple way, and I was like, well, no, I want to do it this way because I don't want, I didn't want iTunes to manage my media, and they were basically like, you're doing it the hard way, and I'm like, no, I just don't want them managing my media. Is there any way I can do that? And they had no solutions for me. That was my single trip.
To the best way to fix an Apple computer is to buy a new one.
Yeah, well, I mean, that sounds about right. That sounds like a good business model. I like that. I don't own any Apple, but yeah, I do like that. I have noticed over the years, Apple does like to be on the cutting edge of things, which if you're a person like me, I just like stuff to work well and don't like to really upgrade that much. So, but I'm running everything over here. I've got like Windows, Apple, Android. I'm going to install Linux. So I'm kind of agnostic in that regard. I was going to ask you. So Doctor Who was out. Star Wars was what, like 79?
77.
70. Oh, okay, a little earlier than I thought. So, but Doctor Who still came out before that, right?
Oh yeah.
Do you think that there's any noticeable influence on Star Wars? Do you think that you can see any influence in that movie, or has anyone talked about that?
I'd say no. I'd say
Well,
no. I'd say Star Wars is quite different. Like Star Wars isn't really science fiction. Star Wars is a sort of fantasy.
well,
And it's derived, seems to me, more from older fantasy, and again from like Joseph Campbell sort of stuff. So more like epic sort of fantasy. Like older sort of stories. That's not what Doctor Who's about. Doctor Who's really at its core is like about a scientist who sort of goes around and solves problems without using violence. Like Star Wars, absolutely, you solve your problems with violence.
well, you have to remember one of the actors who played Doctor Who, Peter Cushing, is in Star Wars. He's
all right, okay. Well, you do that. That is a good point. All right, so there is that connection, and he played in the movies because Terrence. Wait, which one was Terry Nation who wrote the Daleks? Was it
Terry
Nation?
He kept the rights.
He kept the rights to the Daleks. He's very smart. It was very early days of BBC, and somehow he got in this contract that he owned the rights to the Daleks. So he was able to sort of farm them out, and they did some Doctor Who movies, but they're like non-canon. They were sort of remakes of shows. The first one's not that great at all. The second one is actually not bad. The Dalek Invasion of Earth. I'll always enjoy the Dalek Invasion of Earth. And they both sound like they had Roy Castle, the first one, and Bernard Cribbins in the second one. And then Bernard Cribbins actually ended up being in Doctor Who later on, didn't he?
Yes.
Like later on in David Tennant, he was like a relative of one of the assistants. But all right,
Those films are canon. You cannot convince me otherwise.
They're canon for you.
Oh yeah.
I watched the first one was on the other day on it was the riff tracks. I quite enjoyed it.
But you have to remember, for American sci-fi to work, you have to have British actors. You can Google articles. The last few Star Wars movies, all the lead females are British actresses, brunettes. And there was an article of, does Star Wars have a British brunette problem? And they've learned that if you want a successful sci-fi or fantasy movie, you have to have British actresses. Logan's Run is the perfect example of that.
All right, here we go. Now we're getting to Jenny Agutter. You does never met my sister, but some people might say she reminds them of Jenny Agutter.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because Obi-Wan Kenobi was British, and it was that article written in The Onion. Does Hollywood have a British, or does Star Wars have a British?
No, that was I forget who wrote that, but that was a serious article.
Because it could go either way in my mind. Like in today's climate, it could go either way. Interesting.
Well, it was sort of serendipitous. I think it was cheaper for Lucas to sort of go and make it in the UK. They went to the desert. They used the UK studios, and so they had basically, they took their American stars and then filled everybody up with British people. And a great idea. Peter Cushing, one of the world's great villains.
I mean,
Alec Guinness, like literally, like probably one of the greatest actors around. I mean, I don't know. I think he was pretty well. He didn't really hold with Star Wars fandom though. My mum liked to read. My mum did like a lot of acting, and she read his autobiographies. He wrote several books, and he didn't like it. He would tell kids that came up and said they watched Star Wars 100 times. He would tell them never to watch it again. Which is, I don't know. I think that was more of the time. Like at that point, actors were still like that, and all the Star Wars cast were a bit like, it was too much. But I think now they're a little more able to do it. But I'm sure it's still very hard for them. Yeah.
Well, you have to remember at the time, in the 70s, as a kid, you had Star Trek, and then you had Lost in Space. And
Dr. Smith.
You've seen all of those episodes, and then what starts coming to the United States is Gary Anderson's UFO, and then Space 1999. So kids who saw Star Wars in the 70s, that's just like a bigger Space 1999.
Yes. All right. Yes. So you're a little bit older. Yes. So I'm 52. Yes. So yes. So space. So I would get a little taste of Space 1999 and some of those Jerry Anderson things when I was little, but then they were more gone by the. And then Star Wars sort of came around, I suppose, and they, I don't know. Yes, it just didn't really see much more of them after that. Because they never showed repeats in those days. Like they would repeat things once, but then you'd never see them again.
Yeah, I mean, people think Star Wars is its own thing. I think of it as this cool British sci-fi movie with laser swords and space wizards.
Yeah.
It's like a Hammer. It's like a Hammer science fiction movie, and it's you could argue that because it has Peter Cushing in it. Pretty much anything that Peter Cushing is in by default is a Hammer horror movie.
Right. They gave it a really sort of veneer of class, really, didn't it?
Yeah.
Having that. And just the art was so beautiful, I mean, that was really the key to it. It was the beauty of the art. And then I was reading a good article about the edit, I forget her name, the editor, but apparently she just did this sort of cut it to the bone and just really made a very sort of quick, fast edit. And, that's a big part of it, is it sort of just gives you the taste of all this stuff. And then the more of it they do, the thing is they'll mention something like the Clone Wars, and then immediately you've got this whole idea. Now the Clone Wars is all like laid out. You've got a whole series of the Clone Wars.
Well, it gave us an addiction to spaceships. So there was Star Trek and Lost in Space, and they had great spaceships, but they were nothing compared to UFO and Space 1999. And then you saw the spaceships in Star Wars. And that just created a huge demand for, these spaceships, which are just, in essence, a block of wood covered with old model parts.
Oh, yes. And I would love it, right? So a lot of these guys were British, these sort of model makers. They were sort of making the way. And they would have it like, on children's TV, they'd have there was a sort of magazine show they would have called Blue Peter. And they would I remember more than once, I think they would have on these sort of model makers who are working on these things, and they would come in and they would show their models and like all the different bits that they were using and how they made this and that. And, that always just like, oh my God, I always thought that was so, fascinating. Yeah.
And then you have to remember, after Star Wars, I think it was like a year later or maybe 2 years later. I can't remember if Empire came out or if it was Alien. But when Alien came out, Alien was industrially designed. The visuals were designed by Ron Cobb, a great cartoonist. Mobius. I can't remember.
Mobius. Yes.
I can't remember. Sid Mead worked on it. Chris Foss. I mean, all the 70s kids were buying these books of spaceship paintings, and everyone knew who Chris Foss was. Of course, we also didn't know that Chris Foss also illustrated a very famous adult book, which I won't name the title of. But we were raised to be spaceship. We were raised to be spaceship junkies, and that's why you ended up with shows like Buck Rogers and Battlestar Galactica and terrible movies like Star Crash or Battle.
Oh yeah, I've never seen that one. I want to see it now.
I don't remember that one. I watched some I watched some Buck Rogers at one point because that was, I think, a primetime show. That was like a network show at like 6 p.m. It's interesting, this obsession with spaceships, because it reminds me of like an extension of this love affair Americans seem to have with cars. It's like an extension of that, but in space.
Yeah. Of course.
It's interesting what you said, Chuck, about like this epic battle is Star Wars, whereas Doctor Who's kind of this guy going around just helping people. Because there's this long tradition of shows like that, and Kung Fu, I think, is one of them. Kung Fu is the one that comes to mind, where it's just kind of this traveling guy that he goes around fixing people's problems and wandering at the end. But there's a bunch of them. And there was one about a trucker called like BJ and the Bear, which is kind of like knockoff.
I wasn't actually watch that. It was on the same time as my dad once. It wasn't too bad about it.
You need to solve people's problems. You need a big rig and you need an orangutan. Yeah, and
I remember really wanting to watch that. It's got a monkey in it.
yeah. There's a bunch of shows. I just I can't think. There's probably a name for that type of. There's probably a name for that genre. I know, like it's like a hunter-gatherer fixer genre. But yeah, that's interesting.
Yes.
I didn't watch
Fix
that
the genre. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or the Incredible Hulk was that, really, wasn't it? Except
yeah.
the trouble was, the Incredible Hulk, he would be trying to get away, and he would be trying to sort of just keep his mind down, and then there'd be a problem, and he'd help the problem, but then the Hulk would get in there, somehow make the problem worse, but somehow in the end solve the problem, but then he has to go. It was quite a complicated formula you had to follow.
like David Carradine and who's it? Who's Bill Bixby? They were both in those shows. They were both kind of solving the problem with violence. It was kind of like, but they were put in this position where they didn't have any options. But ultimately, it was violence that was going to solve it. David Carradine did not want to kick your ass, but he was going to have to do it every single show, and that was going to solve the problems.
You see, that's the difference between commercial television and state television. You see, the BBC is funded by the license fee that you have to pay. It's a tax on your television, on owning a television. And you pay whatever it was. I mean, back then, I don't know what it is now. I don't know what the license fee is, but let's say it's £100 a year, somewhere like that. Or it was, and so that's a fair whack. But that goes to the BBC, and then nobody tells the BBC what to do. I mean, they're funded by the government. The government can't tell them, so they'll just as easily tell off the government. And yes, and so they definitely have a mandate. Make education programs. Like the original concept is, he's a sort of time traveling history professor sort of thing. He's going to go to different eras of history, and he's going to teach you about history. And because he's a teacher, he's not going to solve his problem with violence. But yeah, the popular shows are the ones where action. That's what people want. Not to know action. I mean, it's imaginative show as well. Like because it's you've got a few bits of cardboard around, and you've got to conjure up the entire Aztec Empire or something, on black and white TV in the 50s, So there's a lot of that. You can look at it one way and go, well, no, that's not working at all. Or else you engage your imagination, and you're like, well, wow, and you're thinking about the Aztec Empire and all these different issues,
Don't forget quarries. If Dr. DuRan is known for anything, it is a show that tours all the beautiful quarries of England.
Yes, well, they would definitely get a budget because it was different. Because you can film in the studio on your video cameras that they had then, the studio video cameras, or you'd have to go on film. So it was much more expensive if you went on film and went out on location. But Doctor Who, it was always a popular show. It was sort of like on Saturday, so they always had a bit of a location budget. But yeah, it didn't really stretch to much more than the nearest quarry.
I love what comes out.
Quarries did a pretty good job of looking like an alien world. I mean, alien world are supposed to sort of look like quarry.
Is that how you draw these backgrounds, Chuck? I mean, do you think of a quarry and then extrapolate from that?
Yeah, you can, if you had to be in the sort of snowy waste, it was obviously a model. But it was good. It was good times. Yes, I don't know. It's a bit silly. I mean, like Doctor Who sort of thing. It's like in the moment you're like, oh, it's a bit crap. And then when you think about it, you're like, oh no, that was pretty good.
I love that stuff. I love guerrilla production. I mean, there was this zombie movie. How like movies come out in batches. Like zombies will be hot, volcanoes will be hot, and they'll come out in batches. There'll be 4 volcano movies. So they did this with
yes. The idea is around. They're doing a volcano movie. We got to get our volcano movie.
What's it called? FOMA, fear of missing out from Hollywood. They're like, well, Paramount's making this zombie movie. We should throw our hat in the ring too. So there was a British zombie movie that came out. Let's see, and around the same time, and I can't remember what it was called, but it came out the same time the Will Smith movie came out, I Am Legend. And the Will Smith movie used all what I assume to be really expensive CGI and much higher budget. And the British version was like makeup and contact lenses, and those zombies were about twice as terrifying. And I love stuff like that. This girl.
Oh yeah, you're talking about like 28 days later or whatever.
Yeah, that might have been it actually. Yeah. And those zombies, I mean, if you've watched both of those films, the CGI zombies aren't half as terrifying in my opinion. And I'm sure that they probably made it for a fraction of what the American version called for. And I love that stuff. I'm very much into like this this thing about guerrilla filmmaking or guerrilla music making where your just concepts are really strong and you use whatever is laying around, and you're innovative with it.
Yes, so there's like Lars von Trier and his Dogma documents, the Danish filmmaker, where like, he wants you don't even try to sort of keep the booms and the cameras out, you're just trying to go for the moment, and that's what it's all about. And, he makes pretty good movies like that.
Yeah, I saw some of those films. One of his thing, I think, seemed to be like very kind of like raw edges of emotions. And
the Bjork one, Dancer in the Dark, is probably like the
is that
ultimate,
I
think.
Yeah, well, that was, geez, man, that was pretty dark.
Yeah, that's totally devastating. It's very brutal. It's completely dogma. It's a musical. It's got it all really. And it's very, very dark. It's like you watch it and you're like, oh my god.
Just left out the dancer part and just called it the dark.
I don't think I support the death penalty anymore.
I saw it
If you ever supported it. That's the best anti-death penalty movie, really.
Yeah, I don't remember a whole lot of that except the feeling I left with afterwards, which was like not good. It's kind of like getting food poisoned. You felt bad for about a day and a half. It slowly went away. Yeah, that was.
Yes.
But I'm a big fan of Bjork, though. Just her art, and what seems to be her philosophy around music, which is kind of an uncompromising philosophy, which you don't see from a lot of artists that I guess get the coverage that Bjork gets. Most of them are kind of I don't know. They're more about showman. There's this aspect of showmanship. It's that whole like McCartney, Lennon type of thing, or Jay Leno, Letterman type of thing, where some people are more about showmanship and other people are about authenticity. And I always thought Bjork was very much over on the authenticity side of the spectrum.
Yeah. Well, she's, yeah, definitely.
Which means you don't always say the right thing to cameras. You don't make maybe the best business decisions and stuff like that, but she's very committed to her art, which I like to see some of that.
Yeah.
Going back to this idea of like, keeping things in balance. That I think I talked about a bit yesterday. All
right. Well, this is good. Well, what are we? We're 11 o'clock. All right. So we've done 2 hours now. So I think that's like a good time to call it quits based on like yesterday where we went on 3 hours. We could probably keep going on, but then I'm worried that we'll run out of things to say.
I have to eat some bacon too.
Yeah, I did a bit more work. See, it's quite productive. I didn't do a lot, but I'm just going to keep working on this one. I've got something I've got to do for Goodman Games. Some nice maps for the Goodman Games Dungeon Crawl Classics Dying Earth. So I don't know. All right, hello. We have one viewer. Thank you for tuning in. And if you're watching this later, oh yeah, Davey Murray. He's making some comments there. Thank you, David.
Hey, that's my friend. That's my buddy from. I'm going to visit him next week in Austin.
Oh, cool. Well, yeah, Davey, why don't you and Chris try and come on next week from Austin? I mean, I think what I'm going to do next week is I'm going to keep coming on at 9. I'll see if I can get some other people. If you can get in here and join us. I mean, it seems like it's web-based, so it's probably possible. But, obviously don't feel obliged. I'm peddling Itsy Bitsy Spider. That is kind of the whole purpose of this whole shenanigans. But also just to talk to, like, my friends. And so, yeah, if you're out there watching this or watching the recorded episode and, I'm trying to keep it family-friendly. We're a little all over the place right now, but yeah, there's some interesting things to talk about, and Davey says he's I'm sure that's not true. Have you seen us? Look at us. Come on.
I'm just gonna draw a figure for you. You can just you be the voice of a figure.
Yes. Oh, that's something I really want to try. Is Adobe Character Animator, where you can make like a puppet for these sort of shows, right? So I could make an Itsy Bitsy, and then you can like respond. You can have a talking character.
Oh, I could be my alter ego.
Yes.
Spider's getting kicked off the show again.
Yes. So I'm going to see, but I don't know. That's going to be a bit of work. So I'm not sure. That's something I'll be trying to accomplish by the end of the Kickstarter. The Kickstarter runs through April 7th. And is that right? Yes. Yeah, follow the link that's posted on my Facebook page or wherever you're watching this, or Whelan.com, planetearth.com. Where's Itsy Bitsy Spider on Kickstarter? Thank you, Dale. Dale and I will be back tomorrow to sort of talk a bit more about this for a bit. And Chris, I'll see you. Well, let me know what you're up to, like while you're away. But I guess I'll be on. Yes. So thank you very much for helping me out this week and getting it going. I hope we'll be back because you and I, we seem to be able to just chat away for a very long time. And actually, it was quite good having you and Dale chat while I could draw, because that way I wasn't getting too distracted. So that was very fun. And Dale has a lot of interesting things to say. Well, you do. Well, about this stuff. I think it's interesting to sort of different people to hear. And people like to talk about this stuff. So, yeah, and art supplies. And, and if you're watching this and you want to come and join the conversation, please do. Basically, if you're watching it, we'll just ask you to come and join us. That's how it works.
Yeah, I'm hoping tomorrow we can talk more about cartooning and just the mechanics of it and any tips you can give to people who want to give it a try, and I'm sure we'll nerd out about software and hardware.
Yes, we can sort of talk about some of that stuff. That would be great. Fantastic. All right. Well, we still for a minute, but I'm going to sort of play. I'm going to play the video one more time, and then then I'll close the stream, and then we can just sort of hang out a bit after.
So we say goodbye now, and then
So say goodbye now. Right, bye everybody.
Bye.
Video coming, I think. Wait.
I'm just going up this water spout, y'all. Y'all, hope it don't rain.
The itsy bitsy spider climbed up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. Out came the sun and dried up all the rain. So the itsy bitsy spider climbed up the spout again.
I'm just going up this water spout, y'all. Hope it don't rain. I'm an itsy bitsy spider. I'm also a good hider. Y'all ain't gonna find me.
The itsy bitsy spider climbed up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. Out came the sun and dried up all the rain. So the itsy bitsy spider climbed up the spout again.
Going up this
Up the spout again.
Going up this
Up the spout again.